Thank you, everybody. We'll get the hearing underway. Thank you, everybody in the audience and live streaming for this hearing. I'll just check in here. I've got an apology for Councillor Fulton. Any other apologies? So I ask we vote to accept the apology of Councillor Fulton. Thank you, Councillor Barker. Thank you, Mayor. So, those in favour? Cheers. So I'll just have a confirmation of the order of business. We've got live streaming on for this as well, which I think is great, which is on the YouTube channel as in the past. This morning's hearing is to hear submissions regarding the proposed reserve revocation of Emano East Reserve. And we've got a number of speakers today, and I ask you've got 5 minutes each for the speakers, and we'll allow some questioning of that. But just a reminder to those in the gallery, but a reminder to the councillors around the table, today is a chance for asking questions of clarification. It's not a chance to debate or put a view, etc. That comes later on. Today is just a chance to listen to the public, and as this is a good opportunity, and originally this was scheduled for December hearing, and I ask that we extend that to now to give a better chance for the public to indulge and understand and to be able to give their view on it. So today is solely a day for us to hear from the public what their thoughts are on the presentation of this revocation or potential revocation. And I'll just say, just a recap on what we're doing, the context of today. The Council decided on the 8th of September 2016 that the Emano Street Reserve was surplus to requirements and asked the Chief Executive to commence the process to remove the reserve status. Council publicly notified the proposed revocation on the 9th of November and the 7th of December 2016 under the requirements of the Reserves Act. Copies of these notifications have been tabled, and Phil, please ask one of the staff if you'd like to see some more copies on the table back there, and councillors, let me know if there's anything there you're missing or any clarification on that. After today's hearing, the next step is for the committee to deliberate on these submissions on Tuesday the 28th of March. The committee on the 28th of March will either make a recommendation to council to either proceed with a revocation and request the Minister of Conservation to revoke the status, thereby creating a freehold land, or they may decide to reject this revocation of reserve status. If the reserve status is revoked, a separate report on options for the future use of the land will be prepared by officers for the relevant committee. I'll invite the first.
Mr. Chair,
Sorry.
excuse me, apologies, and I should have let you know ahead of this. I've just got a question in relation to the process.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
I just noted in reviewing my documents, and I'm pleased that we've got a copy tabled today of the notice of the date extension. But I just want to query the original notice and ask the Chief Executive if the original notice complied with the requirements of the Reserves Act. It's too stated. Oh, thank you.
Just asking for
Mr. Chair, my understanding is that the advertisement was drafted with the requirements of the Reserves Act in mind and is compliant.
Follow-up question, do timeframes apply to the period which objections can be received for this process?
Perhaps I can take advice on that and come back to you if you were to start the hearings in the meantime.
I'd prefer to be very sure before we start that we've done everything we need to do.
We'll just have a short adjournment. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, the minimum requirement in the Reserves Act is for 30 days. The extension was provided on the basis of wanting to provide people with more time, given the summer break.
And my response to that is correct. further requested that we have an extension on that time because of the timing of the advertisement and a time to give a good chance for the public to have a good opportunity to respond to this. I think it's of big or small, it's of great importance to the community as a greater community. Councillor Laurie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not a member of this committee, but I'm here today because I'm a member of council. I am also someone who lives in the area that we're going to be discussing today. So I just want it to be known that I won't be voting on any decision regarding the status of the reserve, but I will be at the table today to hear the submissions.
Thank you, Councillor Laurie. It's been noted that you're sitting at the table. I'm just going to give a bit of advice on that because my thinking is as independent as you're being, and you're part of the council, and you pointed out you've got a conflict of being in the area on that. I'll just get some advice as being a part on the table for this and what sort of inference that has. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Laurie, and I appreciate the situation that happens for us all when things come up in our neighbourhood, etc. But I will make it very clear that because of the conflict, that today is not a chance for us, obviously, as you know, not a chance for us to debate, but clarification only. So I do ask that you do not participate in the hearing, but understand your willingness or desire to listen to the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions from around the table? Cool, we'll get this underway. I'll invite Miss Kate Schwartz to the table. Thank you. Thank you for that. So as you got the button on there, for the microphone on.
Good morning.
Just,
Thanks very much
welcome.
for letting me
thank you, Kate.
speak to this proposal about selling off the Emano Street East Reserve. I'm opposed to this, and I hope you're all going to vote to reject the proposal. First, I'd like to introduce myself. My name's Kate Schwartz, and I'm a new resident. I've just moved here from Wellington, and I've bought a house that's within a kilometre of Emano Street. So I'm both a local and also aware of the housing market in the central area. I'm opposed to this proposal for four very strong reasons. First is the importance of reserves. I'm sure you all realise that reserves are created for a good reason, and I'd like to quote from your long-term plan, 2015 to 2025, Parks and Recreation. It says, parks and other facilities that support active recreation are a vital resource, and I completely agree with that statement. Then over on the service levels, performance measures and targets part of the 10-year plan, it says, current parks and open space provision will not be reduced except where divestment offers clear net benefits to the community. So during this consultation process, those clear net benefits to the community have not been publicised or explained by the council. There was no background paper explaining what those benefits are in the consultation. I'm sure somebody in the council, some officer must have written a paper about it, but I think this committee should really share that information with the public for a proper consultation. Moving on to my second reason for opposing this proposal is the impracticality of building on this site. It's a steep site. Even if a few committee members have not been to the site, if you look at the aerial photo, you'll see a big scar where the land has slipped away. So it's not, by profession I'm a civil engineer, and it's not very good land for building on. As an engineer, I know that it's possible to engineer anything. You can build on any slope, but it's expensive. So this land will cost a lot of money to develop. The foundations will be more expensive. It's not a good proposition to build houses there, because if you sell the land, someone's going to pay more to develop it, so you won't get such a good return for the land. Steepness, on the other hand, is not a problem for recreation reserves. I don't know if any of you've been up the Grampians, but that's quite steep, and it's a very popular recreation reserve. So this land is valuable for recreation and for other reasons, which I'll cover. The third reason is stormwater. So every drop of rain that falls on a roof or a driveway or a road or a paved surface becomes a problem it becomes part of your stormwater network system. You have to dispose of it. The council has to dispose of that downstream. And if you look on the resource management planning maps, down in Emano Street in the valley, there's already flooding problems there. There's clearly shown flood path and inundation areas on the valley floor in Emano Street. So any building on this land will make it worse. I don't think the people who live down the valley would be happy about the flooding getting worse. From an engineering background, again, I can tell you there's a formula to work out stormwater flows, and if it's paved area, the factor is 100% goes into the stormwater system. If it's grassed or shrub land, it's 0.2 or 0.3 or something a lot less. So the value of this land is the water isn't entering the stormwater system and doesn't have to be disposed of downstream. So the final reason I'm going to talk about is, I'll go back to your 10-year plan. Neighbourhood parks and reserves provide for safe and informal recreational use. They also help to break up the built environment, offer visually attractive surroundings, and provide ecological corridors for wildlife. So it's not just people who use this land to access the street, Mahoi Street up above. It is an ecological corridor for birds and invertebrates and insects and lizards to get from the large area where there's a lot of big trees up on the top of the hill to the valley floor. And lizards are really endangered in our suburbs because of cats, so I speak for the lizards. Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. Right on the button there with the 5 minutes. Very cool. No, well put. I invite Mr. Angus McIntosh. Sorry, right. Any questions? Sorry, Mr. McIntosh, my fault. Any questions there for Kate? Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Kate, for that excellent presentation. Kate, do you see any room for compromise here of any kind?
When I first saw this notice downstairs, there was an A4 piece of paper on the wall, and it had two different colours shading on it. One was red and one was yellow. I asked at the desk what this meant. They didn't know, they weren't able to tell me. And when the consultation was re-advertised, those shadings had disappeared. It was all one colour. So I presume at some stage they thought of only selling off part of the reserve. Again, there was no explanation in the information given to the public, so I've got no idea what the council was thinking, but well, as I said, I think stormwater is a big problem in the area, so building is not really appropriate on the site. I think access up to Mahoi Street is a really important part of the reserve as it is now. So I think that should be maintained.
Thank you.
Is this on? Yeah, thank you. Thanks for this opportunity. My name is Angus McIntosh, and I've lived next to Emano East Reserve for 20 years. I live there because I love the area. Over 2 months have passed since this proposal came to light, and I'm still shocked and upset by it. I'm shocked and upset by the process. There appeared to be no serious intention by Council to communicate their proposal to the Nelson public. This only happened after neighbouring residents were made aware of the proposal, almost 2 weeks into the process, and in turn notified Council of their concerns. We even had to point out that the information was not available on NCC's own website. I'm shocked and upset because this proposal goes so completely against Council's own parks and reserves guiding documents, which state current levels of parks and reserves provision will not be reduced except where divestment offers clear net benefits to the community. And also, priority will be given to sites that link to surrounding streets and walkways, connect existing reserves, link to other public areas such as schools, town centres, community facilities or public transport routes. On these grounds alone, there is absolutely no case for the revocation of this reserve, since Emano East Reserve performs all these functions. And with this proposal being so completely out of step with Council's direction, how could residents possibly have anticipated that such a move was even possible? Don't we all live in the assumption that reserves are protected? There have been 3 reasons given for this proposal. Firstly, that there is another reserve being developed nearby. It's fantastic that Piper's Park has been developed, and many of us here have been involved in this too. However, this is not a reason to get rid of the very reserve that provides the corridor for birds and people to it. Secondly, that there is space for 6 lots. This is vague and extreme and tells us nothing except that some form of housing is the end goal. And thirdly, that the reserve is underutilised. I live opposite the reserve, and this is not even true. With this lack of information, we are left to make our own assumptions that the land is earmarked for special housing, which in itself would be very odd, because my understanding is the intention of the Housing Accord is to provide inner city housing without compromising green space and biodiversity. This very small piece of reserve is sandwiched between 2 huge privately owned blocks of empty land, combining around 37 hectares, which are destined to be developed for housing when the time is right for the owners. The crucial link that Emano East Reserve offers between these blocks will look tiny when these developments eventuate. But most of all, I am shocked and upset by the breach of trust. There was a long-standing agreement between the council and local residents, of which I was one, that this much-valued reserve would be maintained and developed. How can NCC live up to their own objectives of working in partnership with the community and recognising the potential for volunteers to play an important role in parks and reserves, if at the drop of a hat, 20 years of community involvement, vision, hard work is simply swept away? What does this teach our school children who return to view the progress of their plantings year after year? My hope is that something good can come out of this incomprehensible proposal. I ask you to please recognise the importance of this reserve and harness the community's enthusiasm to complete the small amount of remaining work to take its development to completion and fulfil the dream that we've been working towards for the last 18 years. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. So we've got a minute. Any questions from the table? Thank you. Councillor Richard, Mr.
Yeah,
McIntosh.
sorry, got a
Just got
question
a
here.
couple of questions. Here you may be able to answer.
In reading through the submissions, it comes up a lot, the questioning the benefit to the community. In other council business, we hear a lot from people who are really saying that housing affordability and access is a real concern and issue. So does 6 houses not constitute a community benefit in your opinion?
Yeah, I don't disagree that houses are a community benefit, but I think it's to revoke a reserve, which when this is further developed by the land that's there, it's actually the access route to those other houses, and it's actually going to be of benefit to all those houses that are going to be there. So it's not, yes, I don't say that houses aren't of benefit, but I just think it's absolutely wrong to revoke a reserve for that purpose when there's plenty of other land. I mean, yeah, a huge amount of other land that can be used. Why do that when it's such an important reserve to link all the reserves together? Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt again. I'm just wondering if I could ask through you to the Chief Executive. This is a part of our, and it's been raised by many submitters, covered by our Parks and Reserves asset management plans. And I'm going to have several questions on when we come to this for the officers, but I'm very conscious that unless they're sitting behind me, I don't think we've got officers who are here with that expertise. And they may be in the public gallery, but I'm just going to, I would really value them being here because I think they need to hear these submissions so they can respond appropriately to our questions later on.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just bear with... Thank you. Annette?
Thank you, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to this this proposal. And you'll see by my submission that I am opposed to this on several counts, and some of those have been and will be addressed as speakers come. I think the major ones that I really want to talk about is the social contract that I see that there is between the residents of the city, not just the residents of this area, but the residents of the whole city and the City Council, that this is a reserve that people have put enormous amounts of energy into for 2 decades now. And that this is not an isolated case, that in fact the residents in this area have paid very close attention to reserves throughout this area, and because we regard them as extremely important for the reasons that I've outlined. Given the shortage of time, I really want to focus my presentation on the health benefits that I see that are crucial, that we all need to address crucially. And one of my roles at the moment is as the Clinical Director of Women, Child and Youth Health at the Nelson Marlborough DHB. And if I'm asked the question of what is it that keeps me awake in bed at night, there aren't very many things that pop up, but one that comes as a recurring issue is the question of lifestyle issues and the impact they have on health, and specifically obesity in children, which is an area of my brief, and in pregnant women. 1/3 of our children who are having their before school checks, so they're not even 5, 1/3 of our children are overweight or obese. And there are a variety of reasons for that, but without a doubt, obesogenic environments are a major contributor. Now, exercise isn't the only thing, it's the access to fast food outlets and high calorie, nutritionally light food, but exercise is a crucial part of that. And part of the exercise issue is the culture of exercising as a daily thing. So we've now really lost 2 decades of children. In my generation, the bike sheds at school were absolutely full. A few years later, they were all taken out because they weren't used, and now they're full. So I'm one of a group of people who are riding bikes frequently to work. In my workplace of 12 people, 4 of us ride almost every day to work, and we're now 19th on the challenge, the February Bike Challenge nationally. I've reduced the number of car parks that I have to hire. One of the women who rides to work every day takes her 3-year-old to the daycare centre. That 3-year-old is going to grow up with a culture of commuting to work on a bike. And the reason that she can do it is because of the wonderful bike tracks that have been put in place by the City Council. No question of that. So the development of those reserves I see as a major contributor to the ongoing health, when we can provide good off-road tracks where children can ride bikes, where children can ride safely, where people can walk their dogs and at any stage in their life, but particularly in their later years, that's a major contributor to the health and well-being of our entire population, and the benefits of that will have enormous ramifications. So one of the things I want to really emphasise today is the importance of this reserve as part of the linkage of a series of green spaces from Bishopdale right to Tahuna Beach, and the importance of being able to go on those networks with very little contact with the road, and put out the challenge of keeping those, developing those, and really encouraging the use of those. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Annette, one of the submitters is actually a principal in Nelsust, and in his submission, which I think is his personal submission, I don't think it actually reflects officially Nelsust's view, but he is in favour of this because it's going to provide low-cost housing, and the benefit that he's put in his submission is that that will enable people to live closer to the city, the 6 houses that will be built there, and that the people will be able to commute by cycle. So he's seeing, can I put it this way, slightly differently to you, the benefit for the health and the obesity problems by allowing more people to live close to the city to commute by cycle easily.
And I would support the development of housing as well, and being close to the city and encouraging commuting. My answer would be that there are significant tracts of land in the area at the top of Toi Toi Street and above this reserve which fit that criteria. And when those areas are developed, as they surely will be, and we're making decisions, or you're making decisions now, not just for now, but for 50, 100 years' time, when those areas are developed, this little green space will look very, very small in the scheme of things. Totally agree, we need low-cost housing close to the city, but that's 6 houses, and it doesn't, in my view, it doesn't compensate for the loss of that green space.
Thank you, Annette. I've just got a question here. It seemed to be repeated in a number of submissions here about a contract or an understanding at the time of reserve, part of reserves sold. It's talking about 20 years ago. Part of reserve, portion of it was sold.
Yes.
And there was an understanding that if I'm correct, that if the residents looked after the area, then that would be retained.
Yep, there were meetings at the bottom of that park with Mike Ward, who was the councillor at the time, and with council staff, and there was discussion about the possibility of the residents putting in effort to beautify the park, and the council organised for the PD workers to take down the trees and clear the site, provide the trees in return for the residents who would plant them and maintain them, and that we did. And there was talk at the time of some development of that area to make walkways and to put in a park bench. None of that has ever eventuated, but the residents have most certainly contributed. We planted in 2 separate plantings. We had at least 2 weeding days while the trees were quite small, so the community has fulfilled its obligation to look after that reserve. There was nothing written, it was discussion at the bottom of the hill, and that was reinforced by the provision of the clearing of the site and the provision of the trees by the council.
And the site that was sold is at the southern end of the park, is it?
Yes, it is, where there is now a garage. There's now a garage, and so there's a dwelling on that which blocks off the paper road, which would have made access to 4 residential sites in the past.
Thank you.
I do have some handouts, if it's appropriate. I'll pass those around. So, thank you very much for the chance to speak today.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for the chance to speak today. My wife and I are local residents living in Tui Way. I'll be brief. My submissions are aimed at 2 levels. I guess the precedent effect of turning a reserve into housing and the merits of the site itself. And these 2 things kind of go together when you start to look at possible policy issues there. And I'm guessing that council will have a policy about how it goes about looking at turning a reserve into a housing development. And I would expect to see in that kind of policy that there should be three important considerations being thought about by council as it goes about that process. And one should perhaps be that the surrendered site, the reserve that's going into other uses, should have little or no amenity value. I'd have thought the second issue should be that the surrendered area should be replaced to maintain the reserve portfolio. As in any business, if you dwindle down your stock and don't replace it, you won't have a business for very long. So I'd have thought that the maintenance of a balance of reserve in the face of changing parts of the reserve portfolio would be an important part of any policy that you might have. And thirdly, I think that any policy about a surrender of reserves should have reference to other community needs and purposes. So of those three things, I think we can say that one of those conditions is met. I mean, I acknowledge that the Housing Trust meets other community needs, but I think there's problems with the other two conditions that I proposed, and that I understand that this site is not being replaced. There's no proposal to add to the reserve portfolio, as it were, by finding other reserve land to replace this. And secondly, I think that the site has intrinsic recreational and amenity value as a linkage in the Grampians to Sea walkway network. I've got some photos on my handouts, and I think there's only a few of those, but I'll just talk to those briefly. I went round and looked at the very lovely Murphy North Reserve with its lovely playground, which is actually a credit to council. That very clearly signposts the walkway to Matapo Terrace, and the Murphy North Reserve sign makes quite an issue of the access to Matapo Street. Likewise, when we go over the hill and look at the Pipers Park, you can see that Princess Drive access is very clearly highlighted at the start of Pipers Park. There's a lovely sign there, again accentuating that Princess Drive is accessed through this lovely bit of walkway, which is it's a credit to council. But what we have at the end of Mahui Street is nothing. There's no sign. There's no indication of access. There's no signage or indication of walkway. Likewise, at the top, I don't think that there's in fact a formal access way from, I think it's Matapo Street at the top. But what I do see there, which is rather interesting, is that when you look at the detail of the end of Matapo Street, there's a really, really good concrete spillway that drains all of the stormwater off Matapo Street down onto the top of the reserve. So I'm not sure if that's a factor in the ongoing erosion, but it doesn't look too flash to me. Here's the front of the reserve. The only signage is that which advertises the current application. So the picture tells 1,000 words. I think that if there were signs, steps, pathways, tables, seats, or a playground, this area would get used a lot more. I personally went out to have a walk around trying to use the walkways a few months ago, didn't know it was there, couldn't find it, went home going, gosh, that's a shame I couldn't walk through, to Piper's Reserve. So lack of promotion of the reserve is a feature, and its possible lack of use. So my submission in short is that rather than thinking about selling this reserve, the council should be deciding how to promote and develop it as part of the Grampians to Sea walkway as an important community recreation and tourism asset. Having just spent a few days in Golden Bay being a tourist, I'm very aware that tourists love to have a walk around. Many of them need to have signposts to see where they're going, so I think that would be a very good outcome for what's happening here. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. John, I'm just looking at the written submission, and you've got a point 4, the proposal's not in accordance with the Reserves Act.
Yeah,
Would you like to expand on that some more?
Yes, thank you, ma'am. The concern there was around the level of notification to the public. I didn't want to make a meal of that because I thought that the time was best spent looking at the substantive issues. Let's face it, you could re-advertise the thing and cure that issue, and we'd still be no further off. I'm here making submissions today. I don't feel as though I've been disadvantaged, but I'm aware that many people feel as though that the application should have been better publicised for people.
follow-up question, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your indulgence. John, would you expect as part of this process, because I mean, I know you've got some knowledge of how this works, that would you expect to know what else council is wanting to do with that land at this stage in the process? Is that, you know, just because I've had a look at some, you know, different ways of doing this. What is your expectation that would be so that you could assess
Out of
the divestment?
Thank you, ma'am. I think that's a very fair question. I think that it would have been helpful to everyone who's here today to have had a bit more detail about what the housing was to achieve, if a walkway was to be maintained. There's like a gap of information, and when there's a gap of information, people tend to make up their own worst stories. So I think that the information pack that should have let people know what the full proposal was to weigh up the benefits and the loss of space against the benefit for housing hasn't been clearly articulated, which has led people to assume the worst. So I think there's been a gap there, but that's procedural. Yeah.
Councillor McGurk.
Question's just been asked.
Any further questions? Thank you, John.
Cheers.
So I invite to the table Mrs. Kate Malcolm.
Good morning, everybody.
So,
Yeah, and thank you for putting my little picture up on the screen there. This straight line of road reserve that you can see highlighted there intrigues me. Obviously, some surveyor in the past sat down in his office, ruled a straight line on his map without taking any notice of what the very hilly terrain was indicating. So on the ground, only Tukooka Street and Matapo Terrace could be formed along this line. The steeper parts had to be turned into walking access only. This line, plus Bob's Track and Day's Track, take walkers from the Grampians down over 3 hills down to the sea. It also happens, the line also happens to cross our 2 main bus routes. So if you're footsore or tired after going that whole walk, you can simply catch a bus back to your starting point. I think this is a great asset for our city. I've only been here 4 years, so I could be almost classified as a tourist. And I found that this was very interesting. A straight line on a very hilly terrain. And it's possible some future council may see potential here, may want to develop, enhance and promote this walk, paint symbols on the pavement to show you where to go, possibly even give it a name. Previous speakers have called it Grampians to the Sea. So there you are, it's almost got a name. So it's imperative that you keep the possibility open by retaining Emano East Reserve in part or in whole. A vital link in the chain, seeing that the line itself has been cut, you can see there. It has been cut at this point, and a portion of the road reserve cut off. We must keep the Emano East Reserve so that that whole line is complete. For myself, living on the foothills of the Grampians, I had no idea I could walk out of my house and walk in a straight line to the sea until I read the publicity generated by people who value Emano East Reserve. When we did the walk, we found many of the entrances indistinguishable from private entrances. We looked up this flight of concrete steps. Is that going to a house, or is this part of the council's walking infrastructure? One of the previous speakers has alluded to the fact that in some entrances there's magnificent signage, in other entrances there's nothing. And if there was something like Grampians to Sea or just some sort of symbol that could be stamped on the pavement, we would know where to go. We had several attempts. I think I can do it now though. But I wouldn't be surprised, as I say, if this in the future, this whole historic line, was a valued and well-known element in our inherited network of walkways. It showcases Hilly Nelson. It creates fit and healthy Nelsonians, some of whom love to run up steps. And it demonstrates the dedication of neighbours to their reserves. All of these are wonderful things. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Any questions on the table? Thank you very much. Kindly invite Mr. Stephen Johnston. No problem. So we'll move on to Mr. Duncan Davidson. Thank you, Duncan.
I've also got a few papers to hand out. Thanks very much.
Thank you for that. And just a reminder, which we've been pretty good at so far, just keeping, if you are able to keep under 5 minutes, it gives us an opportunity to ask questions within those 5 minutes. Thank you, Duncan.
Is this working? Yeah. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak here today.
Page 118.
I'm Duncan Davidson. I'm a local resident. I've been in the area for about 7 years now. I live actually right next to the Murphy Street Reserve, and I've been very, very involved in weeding, planting, some track maintenance there as well, and as have many other neighbours in that area. So it's a well-loved area. And I think the same is true of the Emano East Reserve. It's a well-loved area. It doesn't quite get the attention that it should do, partly because it's a very steep track. And that's one of my main concerns about this, is that not only should we maintain this reserve, we should actually fully invest into it, not necessarily financially, but invest it in time, in terms of energy and time and volunteer work. You'll see on this wee map that I've produced, you can see the blue line, which is the current track, and in several of the submissions, people have said that they'd be happy for some housing to go in here as long as the access was maintained roughly along this blue track. Initially, even myself, when I'd first heard about this, I thought we could have some kind of compromise of having some housing in the lower kind of probably the corner close to the housing. Since that time, I've really changed my mind. I think to have any kind of compromise would just end up with a very compromised track. We'd end up with a very narrow corridor if there was housing going in here. And in order to fully utilise this area, I believe we need to actually rebuild the track substantially and follow the yellow line that we've plotted in here. Myself and neighbours, we've discussed it, we've walked this possible route. It would take some work, but I've actually got many countless hours of experience mountain bike track building and also walking track building. I've got the gorse rash to prove it. And I would be very happy. I'd be there tomorrow with my spade to help start re-establishing this track. We could make it so it was much more accessible for people. It wouldn't necessarily need to be as kind of manicured as the zigzag up the Pipers Reserve, but if it was roughly the same kind of gradient, we could achieve that quite easily. And as I said, it could be the council that kind of organises it and puts the track in. But I actually think that with roughly 200 metres of track to make, if you had a dozen volunteers, you could actually rebuild this track in about probably a couple of weekends, 2 or 3 weekends. It really wouldn't take that long. They're very easy to make once you've got the right kind of plan in place. I also think the track not only would be of benefit to walkers and runners and cyclists and others, it would also be of benefit in terms of continuing the ongoing weed control and native planting there. It is quite overgrown in some areas with gorse, and that's not very nice to battle through compared to a good track. So the track could be put in, and we could quite easily, I believe, avoid that slip area in the middle. That's really all I've got to say. The other thing I'd say is I've just totally back up what everyone else has said, that it's just would be really a terrible shame to lose this area. And when you look around that area at the moment, if you glance around, you'll see huge amounts of green spaces, but most of that is privately owned land. It's going to be developed at some point in the future. I don't see that the council should be selling off land which have been loved and cherished by people for a very long time, while on nearby hillsides you've got landowners just waiting for the time to be right to develop their land. It's not up to the people of Nelson to give up their public reserve space to solve the housing crisis, which is central government could be doing much more to deal with that. that's it really. I can answer your questions.
Any questions from the floor? Thank you, Duncan. Just a quick question for myself. I had a good walk, bush bash through there yesterday, and got a few gorse injuries from it. Where do people use when they do go through there? Because I had a walk around and see how it connected to Matapo and Mahoe, etc., and come up and down. And I followed the blue line going up, and I made my way down, pretty much following a yellow line from both sides, and zigzagged across to get an idea of the terrain. People walking up there, which way do they normally go? Or kids are playing up there, where do they follow?
I think people do just generally follow that blue track. I have seen other people, there's some kids who use their bikes and they go down various other routes as well. But that blue track, it's treacherous in the wet, and even in dry conditions, it's quite steep and slippery. It means that people can't use strollers there. If you're a cyclist, you have to be quite a fit cyclist to get up, and even going downhill is quite dodgy as well. So yeah, the blue track's the main track that's being used at the moment, but if we put that yellow track in there, it would
And a quick question,
get a great deal more usage.
Matapo Terrace, Mr. Tidswell pointed it out, I worked my way up there, and I found myself onto a
the hydro slide.
On a concrete drain there, and I was trying to work out if it was a footpath or a drain or so forth. But do people use that?
People do, a lot. I didn't even know I've lived in the area for 7 years until my neighbours had pointed out that particular access way, and I'd also assumed that was privately owned. So that definitely needs to be developed.
I understand you're saying when I walked through there, it was difficult to work out what was what. That was a great expanse there. Thank you.
Okay.
A question from Councillor Rutledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Duncan, thanks for your submission. It all makes a lot of sense. The one thing I am wrestling with a little bit is that it seems that Pipers Park delivers all of these things in quite considerably greater scale. Do you think Pipers Park is insufficient for the recreation needs of this community?
I think Pipers Park is going to get increasing usage in the future, not just by the local residents, but by people all over Nelson. As people have said, there's a connection, you can see that line up there, and to cut out this link in between, really, it's particularly for the Murphy Street Reserve, there's a lovely concrete path going up through the Murphy Street Reserve, really well made, and without this kind of connection between the Murphy Street Reserve and Pipers Park, you're building tracks to nowhere without those connections in between. So, I mean, yeah, Pipers Park is a great park. It's being used much more than it used to be, and I'd love to see Emano East Reserve getting the same usage. It's not really being used to its full potential at the moment.
I welcome Ms. Sarah Burridge. Thank you, Sarah. It's a page, around the table it's page 148.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Burridge. I'm originally from Nelson. In 1996 I returned home after being away for 12 years, and the following year my husband and I bought the house next to the Emano East Reserve that we are talking about today. At that time there were pine trees in this reserve and overhanging our property. They were cut down in response to our request, as they were blocking out lots of light as well as overhanging our house and dropping pine needles into the guttering. In 1998, the Nelson City Council started talking about selling off the reserve. However, this was not popular with people in this community, and in discussions with councillors and council employees at the time, a decision was made to keep the reserve if the community would support tree plantings and help to maintain the reserve. Therefore, a community tree plant was planned by the council and supported and organised by many of the local residents. We put up posters around the area and invited friends and family to come along. The planting happened with over 100 people turning up to the tree plant. These trees are now nearly 20 years old and well established and cover nearly, a good fifth of the reserve. And since then there have been other tree plantings involving Victory School and members of the wider community. I'm hoping that as members of the committee that you will be aware from reading through the submissions some of the history surrounding this reserve.
We now live opposite the reserve and continue to value and enjoy the mature trees with the bird life that now occupies them, and watch with pleasure and appreciation its development. It is actually not true that Emano East Reserve is an unused reserve. We observe on a daily basis people using it by walking and even biking the steep track, and also walking past it on their way to Piper's Park, which is, as you know, is at the end of Emano Street. It has an abundance of bird life contained within the native trees and the tall gum trees at the Mahoe Matapo Street end. And as people have talked about, it provides a link between the Grampians, the Railway Reserve, Murphy Street and up to Piper's Park, and then over the hill into Tunanui. And it is a well-established piece of green space. I'm going to talk about the process just a little bit, because we fast forward to November the 18th, 2016. We receive a notice in our letterbox which announces the Nelson City Council's intention to ask the Minister of Conservation to revoke the reserve status of Emano Street East Reserve on the grounds that it is steep and unusable, and there are two parks nearby, Emano Street West and Piper's Park, which I would actually argue are the same park. And there is apparently room for 6 lots. And then we have less than 3 weeks to object. There is no advertising in the Council's own publication, Live Nelson, or in any mention on their website about the reserve revocation process. We actually are really shocked and wonder how this can be. Does the social contract that was made with the Council really not matter? So within a day, we are meeting as a group to discuss the proposal, because in this area, as you've heard, there are lots of people that care about what happens to the reserve. And we send a letter to the Council and are successful in getting the submission process extended until the 27th of January. A letter to the editor of the Nelson Mail gets the message out to the Council plan, and then the Nelson leader publicises the revocation. And actually a few of us walked the streets and put notices in people's letterboxes to make them aware. I actually think that that's been very disappointing all round, as it seems to me that there was very little attempt to inform the Nelson community of your intention. And I guess that's a big issue for us. And the other part I want to comment on, that there is private land zoned residential on either side of the valley, and it would be my assumption that in 20 to 30 years' time that there will be housing on this land. I do not object to this happening. In fact, I am expecting it. It just really highlights the critical need to keep the reserve. It is a green space which will be much appreciated by those living and using the area in decades to come. As you will be aware, over 120 submissions have now been received on the reserve's revocation, and overwhelmingly the Nelson community wish to keep the reserve. I've been really heartened by the wider community's response to this revocation notice. In fact, I believe we have a real opportunity to make what has been a negative process into a positive outcome. There have been suggestions that if Emano East was signposted at the Emano Street, Mahoe Street and Matapo Street end, and the currently steep track was zigzagged, that it would get even more use than it does now. Members of our community, as have you heard, have offered to be a part of this track building process. I really implore you to listen to those who are speaking today and have submitted in favour of retaining Emano East Reserve. It is people in this community who attend and care for the area at present, people who have lived here for many years, and people who have bought in this area because there is a reserve, and people who continue to maintain other reserves in our area and within the Nelson community. Thank you for your time today.
Cheers, Sarah. That's 5 minutes, but I'll
Sorry.
keep the questions short. Thank you.
A very short, sharp question. Both yourself and Mr. McIntosh have listed your addresses as 124.
That's right, yeah.
Which one of you is 124A?
None of us, neither of us. Neither of us. We both live in the same house.
Okay. And that's number 124 listed on that?
Yeah. Yeah, we're husband and wife. We're husband and wife.
Madam Mayor.
Sarah, thank you for a very thorough submission. Sarah, you made a comment, and I just want to come back to this about only having 3 weeks to respond. Could you give me those dates and explain?
I can definitely
what you
give.
mean by that? Thank
The
you.
notice we received at our letterbox was dated the 18th of November. So in actual fact, it was put in probably the afternoon, because we picked it up on the 19th of November. And at that stage, we had till the 9th of December, which was 3 weeks to respond. Yeah. But then it got It did get extended, but we did ask for that to happen.
Thank you very much.
Very quickly, through you to the Chief Executive, just
Sorry,
a question about Liv Nelson. It was said that it wasn't in there, and I
Councillor Rutledge, more for clarification on the.
Oh, okay. So no,
But
it's a
hold that,
clarification
because
about
after
the
this we
Liv
will
Nelson
ask questions of the
that
officers
wasn't
for
there.
information, so there'll be
Thank you.
time for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I warmly welcome Ms. Carol McKee. Have I pronounced that correct?
Yes. Thank you. Yes, McKee
Page
is
159.
correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Good morning. Emano East Reserve is not forgotten. It is not unused. On the contrary, it's highly valued by locals and people across the wider Nelson community, as we can see from the submissions that has been made on it. This is in spite of its relatively natural and undeveloped state, as we've heard. To a degree, I think it's because of its steepness, because people seek out steepness. It also has glorious tall trees, mature natives and new plantings, and it's sunny and west facing. These things are somewhat rare amongst our reserves. And as we've heard, it forms a really important connection to and between other reserves and walking routes. In my view, and it seems many of the submitters, reserves belong to the community. Perhaps not technically, but definitely morally. And the community are very protective of their reserves. Council's own surveys acknowledge, and I quote, parks and reserves are consistently the area of council provision that is most highly rated by the public. Council also has this moral obligation to retain this reserve, as we've heard from other submitters, from the attempt 15-20 years to sell it, 15-20 years ago to sell it off, when an agreement was made that it would be kept. One of the joys of Nelson is being able to walk from home and connect together lots of green spaces and different angles on our city, and this reserve is one such important connection. Council's own data says that walking is becoming more and more important, especially in the older half of the population, a lot of whom are very active, and the older population is also the fastest growing segment. Council does a lot of publicity about how much it cares for our environment and how much it consults with the community. For example, in the windows of these offices, there are big photos displaying Nelson nature. We also have the Nelson Biodiversity Strategy, which has a foreword by Rachel Rees. We have the Parks and Reserves Asset Management Plan, the Parks and Reserves Activity Management Plan. These documents, some of them are over 100 pages each. A huge amount of thought and detailed work has gone into those by staff of the council and by others, and they state the values and principles that should be guiding council actions. Reading through these was a joy, thinking, wow, council has really great values guiding it. So what is going on? Council needs to take a serious look at its processes and its staff knowledge and attitudes. In some areas, council is doing very well at engaging and involving the community and ideas. Take the Tahuna Nui cycle connection options or the Stokes Centre redevelopments. Options investigated and presented. Consultations widely publicised. Sessions scheduled for evenings and weekends so working people can get there. Multiple stages of consultations, whereas the process used for this revocation process was woefully old-fashioned. Initially, it didn't even comply with the legal minimums. Once the community put a letter together, it was extended, thank you very much, and there was the extra promotion then into Liv Nelson. That did not occur until after the community had complained. This approach has created confrontation instead of engagement and participation. Nevertheless, out of it, we still do have opportunities. We have community coming together and an opportunity for a partnership. Now, overwhelmingly, Council's own documents, including those I've referred to, acknowledge the high value of reserves and the many different ways they're important to the city and the community, such as protecting diversity, biodiversity, the nature corridor, the therapeutic and well-being benefits for the community, the benefits for active lifestyles and health, low-cost options for outdoor recreation, making best use of assets we already have. That's actually mentioned in the policies. Teaching our children to value and care for nature is also an important one. So how can Council be proposing to revoke a reserve within the urban area when its own policies say how important our reserves are? The plan also states the intention to maintain the current level of reserves provision, which is measured per head of the population. Now, Council is working actively to increase population within the city area, such as special housing areas, densification, city centre living. These are all really good things. One of the implications is the area of reserves will need to increase too. It makes no sense at all to contemplate disposing of a reserve that we already have, especially when it's so expensive to acquire new ones, which of course needs to occur when new subdivisions are developed. We'd like to see reserves within easy reach of all people, and it's sad that some parts of the city have relatively little, because some areas are already built up. Some areas, such as this one, appear to have more than the average. However, they need to compensate for the ones that have less.
Just a reminder, Carol, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Finish.
Thank you very much. And the population in this area, given that it has so much private land, as we've already heard, the population in this area will go up significantly in due course. So, in summary, Council's own policies say how hugely valuable Nelson's reserves are, and the community has spoken in large numbers to protect all of Nelson's reserves and this one. The message is loud and clear. Hands off our reserves. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We've used our 5 minutes up. Unless someone's got a burning question, we'll go on to thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Got Mr. Grant. No, he wasn't going offline, was it? No. Cool. Thanks. So we got Mr. Grant Kitto, but he's doing it via telephony. Just bear with us. Thank you. Page 172.
Hello, Grant speaking.
G'day. Hi, Grant. Just thank you.
Hello.
Thank you.
You're okay?
Yeah, very good. Well, warm welcome to you here today. We've got a good audience in the gallery and councillors around the table. Just remind you, you've got five minutes. Sounds like a quiz show. 5 minutes. But if you can go under 5 minutes, it gives us the time to ask you some questions. Thank you.
Yep, I'm reading them as you are.
Fire away. Thank you.
Okay, well, firstly, thank you, sir, the madams, for giving me the chance to speak today from Queenstown. I appreciate it. I apologise if I'm reiterating things that have already been brought up earlier today. I felt strongly it was necessary to be a part of this meeting here today, not least because we're reserving a question ordered our property. Therefore, it has a lot of personal meaning. The Emano Street Reserve has been part of the community gateway and countless hours on the review final, 1983 trust, encouraging the right over. I've often sat and appreciated the notice the work finds out, such as New Zealand Hawks, where they mention around. And there should be opportunities for future generations to be able to experience the same thing. Many speakers have made this their home over the years, and New Zealand is renowned worldwide for its clean and green ethics. As
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kiddo. Appreciate your time. I'll put the questions to the floor or to the table, councillors.
Sure.
No questions. Sorry, one from Councillor Barker.
Sure.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kiddo. It's nice to hear from you from Queenstown. One of the other submitters has promoted the idea of putting a community orchard in this area, and as you're the person that lives virtually the very closest to any of the submitters to the reserve, how do you feel about that idea of having community fruit trees?
That sounds like a good idea. Yeah. I think gardens and trees and community kind of fruit and whatever would be well.
Good. It wouldn't clash with your desire to have lots of natives there.
Well, yeah, I think neighbours are great, and it's encouraging to do that. But we're currently coexisting with, there's more introduced species in New Zealand than there are natives, so we're kind of living in that world. So yeah, I think we're great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Kiddo. That's all the questions I have today. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Have a good day. Thank you
Will
very
do.
much.
So I kindly invite Dr. Zoe Hilton. Thank you, Zoe. I've got down here Corfron Institute. Are you talking on behalf of Corfron Institute or
No, it's
talking as
personal
yourself
submission.
as a resident?
Yes.
Thank you.
It said. Yeah, I didn't realise when I filled in the boxes on the online form.
Thank you.
It just said.
So you just want us to get it 5 minutes.
This
if you
is a
can,
personal.
if you can go under 5 minutes, gives us a chance to ask questions.
Certainly. Kia ora koutou, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to this submission. I live in this house that's beautifully outlined on Duncan Davidson's map that sits right on the corner of Matapo Terrace and the Emano Street East Reserve. And so while my submission may be viewed in the light of NIMBYism, it actually gives me a unique perspective, because I'm probably not going to say anything novel that you haven't already heard being very eloquently expressed by the people who've spoken before me. But living on that corner next to where it appears to be disused land, or a lot of people believe the reserve to be private land when they walk up our street, gives me some really interesting insight, because actually a lot of people walk down my driveway to get into the reserve, because those who know it is a reserve and really want to use it and want to walk through it will find their way no matter what. And so it's quite delightful to see people clambering down the concrete stormwater drain and walking down my driveway to get into that reserve and walk through it. And I noted in my submission that although my neighbours do a wonderful job of clearing the grass and clearing a track through there, in the top small yellow section that you'll see from the end of our street down to the blue line, which is the more formed track, that track remains free of grass even in the spring, and there is an awful lot of grass growth, and it just shows, it's testament to how many people really do use this area, and we really value it very, very highly as part of the walking network. I wanted to just highlight a few things that others have mentioned, but to me that seem very, very important. This reserve is not a park, it's a reserve, and there are many reserves and parks around the Nelson region that don't have reserve status. This one does. It's not a park, a flat park for playing soccer. Yes, it's steep, but it doesn't matter that it's steep. It has an enormous amount of recreational value and conservation value. I have wekas running up my driveway. There are hawks. There are lizards in there, which, as someone else mentioned, are very rare to find these days around in Nelson. And it's part of a network, and people have said that, but I'll highlight it again, because a network only functions as a network, and if you remove in any system, whether it's a roading network or a wildlife corridor or whatever, a network only functions as a network when it is a network, and if you remove a part of that, the network cannot function. So it's a network for people, it's a network for wildlife, it's a network. And it's also, it's really important in that area. It was created as part of the Lungs of Nelson, and those trees that the community planted 20 years ago are now completely self-sustaining tract of native forest, and the other trees that have been planted more recently are almost self-sustaining, and that's really, really important in terms of the air quality in that area, which is a valley that is exposed to this inversion problem in the winter. It's also a very unique reserve, as Carol mentioned earlier. One of the things that drew me back to Nelson was I lived for many years in Auckland, and I chose to move back to Nelson 6 years ago. I took a massive pay cut to move to Nelson because I wanted to improve my quality of living. And my first house was in Orsman Crescent, and the second house I owned was the one I'm currently in now. And I used to take my nephews, who all lived in Orsman Crescent, 5 of them, walking up Mahoe Street and playing in the Emano Street East Reserve. And the reason that we did that, even though we lived right next to the Murphy Street Reserve, is because in contrast to Piper's Park, which is a wonderful park and gets a lot of use, and Murphy Street, which is a wonderful reserve and gets a lot of use, and you can walk up there and pick the plums off the trees now on your way home, and it's delightful. The Emano Street East Reserve is on a west-facing slope, so it's sunny in the afternoons, and for children to be able to go and play in a sunny place, and for people to be able to walk through and actually enjoy some sun in the afternoons in the winter, it's actually quite a unique place to go and for the children to play in. And so it isn't actually the same as the surrounding parks and reserves. And that's basically my last point that hasn't already been beautifully spoken to by everyone else. The fact that it is a reserve and that the reserve would have to be, the status would have to be removed by the Minister of Conservation, it's on principle, it's such a dangerous precedent to remove reserve status, and it really is a very deep social contract when children and adults have for years taken care of that reserve, and we expected that to be there for many generations to come. So I consider it a very, very deep breach of contract with the community if you were to revoke this reserve. Thank you.
Any questions? Councillor Barker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just again for clarification, Mr. Cutto's got the same address
It's
as
the same house. Yeah.
Thanks,
It's
Councillor
our house.
Councillor Courtney?
Yeah.
Zoe, thanks for that. And I sat amongst those trees on Sunday, not playing, but just sitting and having a bottle of water and a banana, actually. But anyway, I want to clear up, please, you've got to help me with this. People are coming up your drive, you say now. Are you telling me that that's not an official entranceway to the reserve?
No, it's our private driveway. It's our land. It's
So we
a shared driveway between myself and
I see.
and
So
my
we should not
neighbours.
take that into account, that as being part of the...
No,
No.
if you see on the map the yellow line,
Yes.
that comes from the end of, well, actually, yeah, that's our driveway. Matapo Terrace is on the other side of the little trees, right on the absolute edge of the map that I'm looking at, the Duncan Davidson's map. That is actually our driveway.
I see.
Yeah. The road reserve is outside of the red area of what's seen there. So this part through here is the road reserve. And so the red area on this map is excluding the road reserve, which is also obviously council land. And I'm sorry I'm elaborating on your question, but I am absolutely, completely and utterly for low-cost housing and a lot more of it. But there are so many areas of private land surrounding this, and there have been consents given for hundreds of houses to be built on that private land, and this land is steep, and so it will be expensive. So these will not be low-cost houses. They will not be cheap, and there will only be 6 of them, and I don't understand how it could possibly make sense to do that, to lose a reserve for just 6 houses. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Zoe. It's a really thorough submission. So I just want to ask you a couple of questions, and I'm going to sort of draw on a little bit of your professional background, if that's okay, because I'm really interested that you talked about this as not a park, it's a reserve. And so it's a different way of actually thinking of it. So if you were trying to think about what is there, what would you see as the principal values of the space? Well,
It's got so many extrinsic and intrinsic values. I mean, the council's own words put it more beautifully than my own, and that's why I quoted them in my submission, because it's got conservation values, air quality values. There are weka and flightless birds that use it, lizards, all of these conservation values. The large trees that are there, it's quite unique in that there are large gum trees that when the large gum trees came down in the Murphy North Reserve, they smashed infrastructure in people's gardens and things. The ones in Emano Street East aren't near any houses, so they're safe to be left there, and those are really important habitat. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just teasing this out a little bit because I'm just a bit curious in the sense of I'm looking at our Parks and Reserves Asset Management Plan while you've all been presenting and just getting the context for that. And I just guess I'm wondering whether we need to have a rethink about how we classify reserves, because they've got different status within that plan. You've had a look at it, and whether in fact seeing this as a neighbourhood park actually doesn't ascribe the values that the community see to it.
I would agree. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I would just say there is no NIMBY issue here. I'm sorry, because we are required to take into account the views of people who have an interest and are affected by decisions. So,
thank you.
Sorry, so I've got a question here. You comment here, the reserve is steep places, but is still a very accessible place for children to play and provide a wild green space so rare to find. And yourself and a couple other submitters live on the boundaries, so you'll see how it's utilised. And I went, as I said before, yesterday I had a good rumpage around the area there, a bit of a bush bash around there, and I felt like a bit of a kid again playing. But you have an idea how it's being used, and often people ask us for more swings, slides, destination playgrounds. And I found in my childhood I enjoyed playing in unkempt grass, gorse, playing cowboys and Indians, whatever you do, and I felt like a bit of a kid again, and I think the kids were saying, get back in the car, Dad. And my old school, is it being used as you suggest, a wild green space, or my old school and those sort of types of plays no longer utilised?
Well, my personal view is that I really love what the council's done with Piper's Park, and it's used so heavily, it's amazing. And I love how the council's improved Murphy Street playground for the children. It's much safer, it's much cleaner, it's a really nice playground now, and it's got great value. But what I love about the Emano Street East Reserve is its point of difference, is that there isn't anything there. But under those gum trees and through those areas, there is this nice open space where kids can just play in a kind of semi-wild area, and to me that's it's a gem, it's a really rare gem. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the chance to speak to this meeting. I won't reiterate too much what I said in my written submission, and hopefully what I've written here, I said basically at this stage of the hearing there's not much that I can say that hasn't already been said, but there are a couple of points that I think I should just keep on, like everyone else is, reinforcing. My understanding is that the members of the council sitting on this committee are charged with acting for the best good of the whole community, and in my opinion they will not be doing that if they support this proposal to revoke the reserve status. In my opinion, this proposal should be abandoned for two reasons, or two main reasons. One is council policy, which we've heard a lot about, the various council policies regarding parks, and people have quoted the various bits out of it that are pertinent to this hearing. The second is that the Nelson Biodiversity Plan, which I assume is not actually a binding document, but it was chaired by our Mayor, Rachel, and there again it tries to bring the point over that we should be conserving and conserving and maintaining what we have already, not removing what we have already. My second point is that the council received what I think was an impressive number of submissions for this particular proposal, nearly all of which were opposing it. There was a couple that had possibilities that you may be able to combine housing and recreation in the same spot, which may or may not be the case. And I've just noted that this number of submissions was achieved despite what I think was the mishandling of the process. And this included minimal advertising to start with, insufficient lead time for making the submissions, no signage on the affected areas. We, as a community, put signs on the affected areas, and the number of people seen reading those signs and inquiring to us if they saw someone there was, I think, one of the reasons that you got as many submissions as you have. And at one stage I inquired of your Chief Planning Officer, I think, is it Susan Matheson? I'm not sure, about details for the, what might happen, and if it was to be revoked and housing put there, would we be party to the submissions for that? And she said not necessarily. So it's basically saying that resource consent could be fast-tracked, for instance, in this case. And so as a community, all we could do was say no. We're working in a vacuum. So I think that was really very poor. The timing of the submission, I mean, from a point of view as a builder and a contractor, if I want to try and sneak something through council, Christmas is the time to do it. And that's exactly what you guys tried to do. Even with the extension to this date, or to when the submissions closed, was during a holiday period, and a number of people I spoke to said they didn't have time. They were on holiday with their families. They were working over Christmas, whatever it was. They really, it was poor timing. But we still got a lot of submissions, so I think you can take from that there's a lot of public feeling here about this issue. So really all I can say is please reject this proposal, and we'll go forward from here and as a stronger community with a park that we know that we can, or park or reserve that we know is going to be there in 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, whatever. I think I'd like to know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Any questions at the table? No, very good, thank you for your time. We've got a Mr. Christopher Skinner. So, good one to finish on. Skinner. That's a good name to finish on.
Oh yeah, I was one of the local people that was involved in the original tree planting, and as you can see by my thing, we talked about the trees being the part of the lungs of Nelson. But I also want to really, this idea of somehow selling a reserve, I've been a Kiwi all my life. I was brought up in the Wellington area, but reserves are sacrosanct. They're for our children's children. They're not, if we lose one, we don't get it back, ever. Especially one that's got 20-year-old trees in it. Now, in my submission, you can see the first photo with me standing in front of them, give you an idea how big those trees are. And on the next page, there's another photo of me standing by the trees that the Victory School kids planted those trees. And when they planted them, they were sort of told that they should, watch them grow. And I think that's a really good thing for kids to be doing. Noel mate planted some as well. Now I've been back since the photo was taken, and when you stand in the same place, you can no longer see the grass. So this reserve is becoming really close to being self-sustaining. It doesn't take a lot of work to keep the grass down to avoid fire risks and so on. And now one of the reasons they gave for possibly changing the status was the utility value. On my next, you can see how in the next photo there's a photo of a big slip in the middle. So I think the mitigation of that would really make it impossible to have low-cost housing on that slope. by the time it was mitigated, you would be looking at reasonably expensive housing, I think. So that's not. And you'll see on the next page, there's another photo of a group of kids. So they don't think it's too steep, and right there they're having a very good time. That's actually right under the gums at the top there, which is also where they could conceivably put their fruit trees, in the top corner there, and still leave that flat area for just exactly that, those kids sitting there having a wonderful time while we're having a street party just down the end of the entranceway. But anyway, my main thing is, you know, I've been to overseas cities where there are parks bigger than Nelson. Tokyo has several parks bigger than Nelson. Some of them are 800 years old. You know, our forefathers left Queen's-Gate, they left these amazing resources. I don't think we should chip away at them. And as others have said, when the surrounding area is fully housed, which it will be in time, this will seem like a very small green space, and it will be very valuable as such. And I think really other people have already said important things, but I really am against the idea of letting reserves go. So that's really it.
Thank you, Christopher. Any questions? Councillor Barker.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just to be consistent, I note that you're living in the same property as Annette.
Yes.
So you're the third group who's sharing a property.
Well, we do agree on a lot of things.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, that's all. No more questions there. Just bear with me a moment. Thank you, Council. That's the end of listening to the submissions there, and as you're aware, we've got a number here that written submissions which we've read as well and taken into great consideration. Now is an opportunity if you have any queries of the staff, clarifications, etc. So also to ask if we want any feedback reports. And also with the deliberations report from today, so if there's anything you'd like to be included, so I ask you, Council, if there's anything that you'd like to be included in the report, deliberations, this is an opportunity to put that forward. Thank you, Councillor Councillor McGurk.
Yeah, thank you. Chair, just a couple of questions that I probably ask the officers.
Microphone on.
Is it on? Sorry.
That's all right.
It would be helpful to have a step-by-step process that they were used to notify the intention to revoke the reserve status. It's come up a couple of times in the submissions that the local community felt like there was a breach of process. The process wasn't that particularly robust, so I need to be sure that at least we've complied or note your advice. And it would also be useful to know what plantings have occurred over the years. They've talked about a tree planting 20 years ago, and subsequently, so might be someone like Mr. Petheram might be an expert in what kind of vegetation is there and what it's suitable for in terms of ground cover. They're about the only two questions I have.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Courtney.
Through you,
Barker.
Mr. Chairman, to our officers, I'd like clarity around the entranceways, whether Matapo Street Terrace is in fact a proper access way. I'd like clarity around that, please. And whether any consideration has been given by our officers in the past to replicating what is tremendous tracks and plantings up from Pipers Park, whether there has been any consideration given in the past to doing that on the other side, up the Emano Street East Reserve.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you. First question is just what date is scheduled for the deliberations decision making?
That was,
It's not in my diary.
yeah, I thought 28th. Councillor Barker, I've got 28th of March, Tuesday, for this committee, and I'm correct, that's for this committee?
At 3 p.m.
I don't know what time, sorry, we'll find that out for you.
Okay. And the other question was, when the management report comes through with conclusions and recommendations after the hearing of these submissions to us, can I ask that some investigation and conclusions be reached as to the arguments that were put up by Council originally and by a few submitters about the advantages of this reserve being revoked in terms of Council's policy and strategy in relation to housing. So I'm virtually saying, although the submissions were very largely in number opposed to the revocation, I still want to see a balanced report. I still want to see a balanced report which looks at all of the arguments.
Councillor Rutledge. And then Madam Mayor.
There were quite a few mentions in the submissions around the value for birds and skinks and geckos and other things that were in that area. Has there been any study done on what's actually living in there, and if indeed this area is important to those species? Is it used as a wildlife corridor or not? That'd be good to know.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I may not be forming these questions particularly well. I've been just trying to track down a document that I was wanting to be able to assist me with those, but I haven't been able to get it from the officer I'm emailing at the moment. I would like an assessment by the officers against our policy documents and our plans. I'd like the proposal assessed against the biodiversity strategy, the relevant reserve management plans, Nelson 2060, to see the context, to provide context for this proposal, please. I would also like some assessment from officers in relation to the stormwater and flood issue risks that were raised. And I think that'll do for now. I've just got the document I was after, and with your indulgence for about another, someone else has got some questions, in about another 2 minutes, I should be about ready to go.
So Councillor Barker, your question for the times on that 28th is 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock. Is that correct? Is it in the chamber here? And is that, no, that's a private deliberation. Is that open to the public? That's public. So you're just letting you know that, so those deliberations are in public to attend as well. A couple of questions. And correct my statement. Our understanding that when we've gone to advertising an intent or the potential to revoke the reserve on the advertising, because a lot of the submissions came through making point to housing and specific to 6 houses on the lot. My understanding of that is that underlying the reserve, it's a residential area, so it's just basically outlining that if it was to be revoked, then it couldn't be necessarily anything else if it was looked upon, and that if it was a housing, then it would possibly be able to hold up to 6 houses. Now, correct me, I'll get correction from the staff there, and so that we're very clear around the table what that means, and if there was any intent, and what that's meaning by having those 6 housing, and what the statement is. My understanding is that that's just clarifying what the land is potential as, whether it can actually have it is another thing to decide. And probably from follow on that, if you are looking at housings, how would that fit in our policy of creating a greater benefit than it was, whatever the intention was, and how that would, and how and why that would fit in. And if it was to be housing, what is the potential of that land? From surface looking at it, it doesn't look like you could have anything on there. But these are things you've got to look at both ends of the extremes and balance, well, why are we going down this alleyway, full stop. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The additional question I have is, I'd like the officers to explain why this reserve was considered surplus to requirements. And I'd like to know which requirements were they talking about when they considered it to be surplus? Thank you.
So give a moment there. Just a moment. Thank you for your time, everybody, both the audience and both the gentleman from Queenstown. I've got a question here from Mr. Barker, or a comment.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, but just one further request for the staff report. Could you please take note of the suggestions in submission number 10815 from Mr. Barry Malcolm, who didn't oppose the revocation, provided the conditions that he listed in the submission were taken consideration of. So I'd like to make sure that we do give some thought to his ideas of what could be acceptable with certain conditions.
I'm going to make a request, and please give me feedback on that on a site visit. We're pretty familiar with areas, but I had a quick look around there, and that was very beneficial. But I think it's important, before we make a decision on anything like this, is to have a real site visit to give in our eyes what it looked like and have a better understanding of what the submissions we're alluding to, pointing out to today. So if you guys are happy to visit the site, I personally think it's very important to look at it from all aspects, from where the direction of the sunshine to the lay of the land and how it fits in the neighbourhood, rather than us just blindly making a decision on paper and the good speakings here. So if supporting that, I would ask that we make a visit. It'll be organised. Thank you. I announce this. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Final questions, my apologies. And I'm not sure the Chief Executive can tell me if this is allowed within the context of a hearing or not for dealing with this matter, but I'm just in terms of, we've had submissions today from people seeking us to further invest in this reserve, to look at walkways or fruit tree plantings or other things, and I would be interested in the officer's initial assessment of how that would fit with our asset management plans from an asset management point of view, if we were to head in that direction. Chief Executive might determine that's for another day. I just propose seeing if we could stretch the elastic band enough to allow it to come in, but if not, I'll wait for another day.
Thank you. So you're asking it to be noted, is that correct, Madam Mayor? From response right now. Thank you. I think I declare this hearing closed.